Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, Allan will build the case to abandon the password, the Skype flaw that will shock you, which server OS is right for you to raid or not to raid, and a big batch of your questions. All that and a heck of a lot more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. This is episode 84, and we streamed it live November 15th, 2012. This episode's brought to you by Godaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by ScaleEngine.com, which is incredible. You should go check it out. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the professor, and the tech, Allan Jude. Hey there, Allan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Hey, man. Welcome to episode 84 of the show.
Yes.
I see you're still rocking the horns, so that's good.
Yes.
We have, brace yourselves, big show. Big show. The first news story, the notes for just the first story alone are 3 pages long. In our Google
I think
Doc.
that's the biggest single story ever, but the funny thing is that most of what I wrote is actually not about the story.
Interesting. All right. Well,
it's just I use the story as a vehicle to teach people stuff.
Well, there you go. Very good. Well,
which is kind of the point of TechSNAP. So
we have a lot of emails. We might not get to all of them this week, but we'll see. So we're going to do all of that coming up. First, though, before we jump off, just 2 quick points of business. Next week, it's Thanksgiving on our regular shooting day. And so we're going to shoot 1 day earlier, Wednesday the 21st at 1 p.m. Pacific over at jblive.tv, which is
4 p.m. Eastern or yes. 2100 UTC now that the time has changed.
Yeah, and so maybe if you've not had a chance to join us live before, that might be an opportunity for you. Or if that's not going to work for you, remember we also have the audio stream that's a little more flexible. You can do it on your mobile or you can do it at your desk over to jblive.info and get the show live that way. I think the show will likely still come out at its regular time or maybe even just a little bit earlier, actually. But we're gonna move it just for next week for the Thanksgiving holiday here in the U.S. because you Canadians already took care of yours, but now it's time for us to take care of ours.
Yeah, ours was like a month ago.
Yeah. All right, the other thing is I just want to remind folks during this holiday season that while they're shopping, it's a great opportunity to support Jupiter Broadcasting and content like TechSNAP. Go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com, scroll down to the bottom of our website, and you'll find our affiliate links. You click those before you shop, and a portion of your shopping session is contributed to Jupiter Broadcasting. And of course, we also have those rocking extensions for your browser linked down there. You add those to your browser, either Chrome or Firefox, and it'll automatically tag your shopping session. And if you are so generous, we also are taking direct contributions. This is nice because we're going to be doing some end-of-the-year purchases to get things in on the 2012 tax year. And so it's good to kind of have an idea of what kind of funding we do have locked in. And so that's very much appreciated. Just go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/donate, and you can lock in a $7 a month or a $10 a month, or on PayPal a $2, $5, or $10 a month contribution, or a one-time. And we think everybody who does that helps us kind of get some budget and some predictability in our business.
But it's very easy. Like, you see that box there? That's from ThinkGeek. And, I was doing my Christmas shopping and bought a bunch of stuff for people and did it with the affiliate code so that it didn't cost me anything extra, but a good chunk of all the money I spent goes to Jupiter Broadcasting.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, everybody who does that. All right, Allan, this first story, I think I've seen this sentiment around there, especially in the TechSNAP audiences. Maybe passwords are just done. Their time has passed. So is this first story kind of echoing that sentiment?
Well, it's kind of talking about some of the problems. It doesn't really propose any solutions, although I only read the first 3 pages of the article because I ran out of time.
Yeah.
Because there was enough on the first 2 pages to make me write 3 pages.
Wow. Okay, so where do we start?
So it's an article by Matt Honan, which is a Wired editor who, if you remember back to TechSNAP 70, which I guess would be 14 weeks ago now, was the guy that had his entire online existence destroyed by an attacker.
Right.
So basically, a recap of that story. An attacker wanted to steal the Twitter account because it was at MAT, because it's a nice three-letter Twitter handle, and those are, considered prestigious to have that.
Right.
So he started that by trying to do a password reset on the Twitter account. And that directed him to Matt's Gmail account, which the attacker obviously didn't have the password to, so he tried to reset a password for Gmail. And so what Gmail does is prompts you to do your alternate email address. So when you sign up for a Gmail, they wanted to know an existing email address you had. And for Matt, that was his Apple account. Now, Google doesn't tell you the whole email address, but it gives you part of the email address with the rest starred out so that you know which email address, but someone that doesn't know your email address wouldn't be able to get your email address. Mm-hmm. But in this case, because it was like matt.honan@apple.com or whatever, or at me.com or whatever it was easy enough for the attacker to guess what Matt's email address was. From that, the attacker calls up Apple Care, and using information he got about Matt from his Wired profile, his Twitter account, Facebook, Google, and all the other stuff he managed to piece together, he managed to convince the Apple Care people that he was Matt and reset Matt's Apple account. And then once he had access to the Apple account, he was able to disable and remotely erase all of Matt's Apple devices, including his iPhone, iPad, and MacBook, which, on top of what the attacker wanted from that was to stop Matt from interfering while he was having his identity stolen.
Disable him.
Yeah. But it also had the side effect of erasing all of Matt's photos and stuff that he didn't have backups of.
Yeah.
Yeah. So once the attacker was in control of the Apple account, he was then able to do a reset on the Google account. So he reset the Gmail, and that sends an email to the Apple account, which he's already compromised. So now he has the Gmail account. Once he has the Gmail account, he could reset the password for the Twitter account, and so on and so forth. If you want all the details on that, I have a link to TechSNAP episode 70 where we go through all of that. So anyway, this is a follow-up article written this week, or actually I think it was written today, where he kind of is like, since then he's been researching online security, and this is basically a summary of some of the things he's found. And it takes a closer look at what happened to him and, a bit of analysis on other things that are happening on the internet right now. A lot of the problems discussed in his articles are not weaknesses in passwords per se, but just the way we use passwords and the way we have systems deal with the fact that people are very bad at remembering passwords.
Sure, to make up for us being human.
Yes. Most of the time the flaw isn't necessarily the password, but the person who makes the password.
And that could or it could even be just from like our brains aren't capable of storing super crazy complex passwords necessarily.
Possibly. People use short passwords. People use simple passwords.
Right.
People use the word password, etc.
Or the sentence password's one of my favorites.
Yeah.
The phrase.
Yeah. So I've kind of detailed a number of different ways that an account or password might be compromised. The first is what's called an authentication bypass. This is when an attacker finds some way to access your account or service or the content without needing a password at all. You remember this happened with Dropbox? I think it was like episode 4 of TechSNAP, where basically there was a bug for a couple hours where you could type in any username and no password, and Dropbox would log you in.
Yeah, that's right.
There's also been similar problems with Oracle, and I think MySQL had one, although that was a different type of attack. And so, plenty of episodes of TechSNAP have been dedicated to talking about different authentication bypasses. Or there's a recent case with Skype where they failed to properly authenticate you when you were doing a reset on your account. And we'll talk about that story later in the episode.
Okay. Are you doing a ninja edit on the dock right now, Allan? Are you ninja editing?
Yeah, I found a typo.
Got to fix that. You got to stop the whole show and fix that.
Yes. So another type is brute force. Accounts that have services like POP3, FTP, SSH, SIP, etc., are all constantly under attack. SIP is kind of a newish one. A lot of people don't think of it, but a lot of times people's SIP password is only numeric, right? Because it's designed for VoIP and stuff, right? Right. And so, if your password is 6 digits, that's fairly easy to guess online fairly quickly. And FTP, people bots have been trying to log in over FTP on every server that they can find running FTP since the early 90s, But POP3 is also a popular attack. I've had a problem with this where a couple of my customers who had like 4-letter POP3 passwords had their account compromised. And once they had the POP3, they had access also to SMTP, and they were able to send email as that user. So they started spamming with a legitimate from address instead of a faked one.
And that can ruin somebody's day because then you get
Yes.
marked as a spammer.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of work to clean that up. So basically, a lot of those services are under attack every day, right? So the attackers attempt to compromise the account for various reasons. They might, use that initial password for like your POP3 account or your FTP account as a stepping stone to gain access to more sensitive accounts. Or they might try, if it's SSH, then they have an account on the machine where they can start attacking other machines from your machine.
Yeah.
Or sending spam from your machine or whatever. So attacks are constantly happening against those services with common usernames and passwords. So it's better to have usernames that aren't just first names because that means that those common username attacks will be a little harder to pull off. If you look at a log of those attacks on any server you might happen to run, you'll see that it's trying usernames like Bob, Joe, and et cetera, et cetera. So if you use even first name dot last name, that'll help a bit. But what you really need to do is have an app like Deny Hosts, Fail to Ban, or SSH Guard that's monitoring the log files for those services, seeing the failed attempts, and blocking the IP that's attempting it so that you can limit them to a small number of attempts.
We did a roundup of a couple of those in an episode of Linux Action Show called Secure Your Linux Box or something like that. And it applies to FreeBSD servers as well.
Yep.
So you can go check that episode of Linux Action Show for an overview of those tools.
And I think we've talked about them on TechSNAP before as well.
I would imagine, right?
I use Deny Hosts is really good for SSH, although it doesn't cover some of the other services as well. SSH Guard is nice, and there's different versions of SSH Guard that apply to different firewalls. There's SSH Guard -IPFW or SSH Guard -PF, or there's one for IP tables and so on. And then Fail to Ban is Linux only, but I think it works with IP tables as well. Another popular one is a database compromise. We've seen this with services like Sony's PlayStation Network, Gawker, LinkedIn, Yahoo, eHarmony, Last.fm, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Actually, there was another one today, Adobe. One of their websites, connectusers.com or something, was also compromised.
Jeez.
And basically, when they compromise that database, they get a list of the passwords, usually of the username, email address, password, a whole bunch of other stuff. Interesting thing there is when they get your username, which is possibly your email address, or a separate field that contains your email address, and a password, then they can try that password against that email address. And if they get that, then they can go and start resetting your Twitter password, your Facebook password, et cetera, until they've compromised everything of yours. Often these passwords are hashed using MD5, SHA, SHA-256, or whatever. But but not always. Sometimes they're literally just in plain text, and then you're screwed right away.
Yeah.
When they're hashed, that offers very little protection, actually. It doesn't immediately disclose your password, but with tools like rainbow tables and GPU accelerated cracking, going through those hashes doesn't really take that long. Like we've seen that with the LinkedIn ones. They hacked huge piles of those passwords very quickly because the way SHA and MD5 work, the same password will always have the same hash. And so they literally just generate a list, right? They just try every password once and store it in a big database. And then when they crack one of these things and get your hash, they look it up in the database and immediately know the plaintext. It literally takes them a couple of seconds to get your password. The longer your password is, the less likely that it's going to be in their database because their database can only hold so many entries. But, sites should not be storing your password in a simple hash like that. So hopefully we'll see more and more services moving towards cryptographic hashes. We saw that with, was it FormSpring? Originally was using, I think, just SHA-1, and has since switched to using bcrypt because it's a lot stronger.
That's right. I remember this.
So as more services start using cryptographic hashes, the main difference there is that with an MD5, you're just doing one loop of MD5. So those hashes are specifically, like MD5 and SHA, are specifically designed to be as fast as possible, right? Because that's the whole point, is that you want to hash a file as quickly as possible. With a cryptographic hash, they're purposely made to be slow. The whole idea is, all right, if you're going to do the SHA 512 crypt, instead of just doing an SHA 512 on the password, you're going to do it 10,000 times. So that way, when an attacker is trying to guess your password, each guess, they have to do it 10,000 times. So that means as they're trying to guess, they have to basically try each one or each try takes 10,000 times longer. Instead of, so in the amount of time they could try 10,000 different passwords, they can only try one. So it slows the attack down a lot.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And it could almost, in some cases, I would think, would make an online attack not impossible, but much harder.
An online attack doesn't. The hashing is happening on the victim server, not. Basically, for an online attack, something like deny host or whatever blocks you after a couple of attempts.
Yeah.
And you never get to try that.
As long as they have something like that set up.
Yes, because we saw that with, was it Virgin or Verizon? One of the phone companies a couple of weeks ago. Remember, theirs wasn't doing that, and somebody could just keep trying until they guessed your phone number?
Yep. Well, and really, though, see, part of the problem is a lot of systems by default don't have anything like that set up to ban. So if you just... You know, like people that get a VPS or something, they just deploy a machine. It doesn't have any of that turned on by default.
Well,
it just lets them.
Before TechSNAP started, but when Twitter was just gaining popularity, their admin interface didn't have a limit.
Yes.
And so somebody broke into the admin interface by just guessing for a couple of weeks.
I remember. Yeah, like they just kept trying for like 2 weeks.
Yeah, and eventually they managed to get a password that worked.
Right, I recall.
And then they managed from that to get into like Twitter's Gmail account and get the corporate Google Docs or something. It was all
and they like leaked a bunch of their stuff.
Yes, it was a huge mess. So yes, to prevent an online attack, you use something that basically bans people from too many attempts. But you also have to store the passwords properly. So you want to use a cryptographic hash like SHA-512 crypt or bcrypt that will basically slow an offline attack down by a factor of 10,000 or more. The nice thing with bcrypt is that each time you ratchet it up, it goes up by a factor of 10. So it's logarithmic. So, you know, if each time you ratchet it up, you're making it a lot harder, like the square almost.
Yeah.
Also, some algorithms like bcrypt are thus far immune to GPU acceleration. Something we learned when we talked about the new version of John the Ripper a couple of months ago. Basically, they started adding GPU acceleration to their engine, and they actually found that so far, bcrypt is slower on a GPU than a CPU.
I remember that was, yeah.
And so for now, that has an extra advantage of making that particular cryptographic hashing method can't be accelerated by a GPU. And so that makes some services like, I forget the name of it, there's a service online, I think it was Moxie Merlinspike's service, where you can give them hashes and they'll crack them for you.
Mm-hmm.
They were specifically targeting like WPA2, I think. But so on.
There's several out there now, though. There's not just one anymore.
Yes. So another way that your password can get out there is disclosure, which is when you give your password away on purpose.
Yeah.
People often share their passwords for one reason or another. And it's not a good thing to do if you can avoid it. You know, a lot of times you'll see like a company where everybody shares a password for some service. It's like it'd be much better if everybody had a separate login so that if something goes wrong, it's attributed to one specific login, not a login that everybody has access to. But also, you know, it makes it easier to remove someone when you just disable their account instead of having to change that password and make sure everybody knows you changed the password and so on. Especially since, you know, someone trying the wrong password a couple times could get the whole account locked out for everybody, not just the person who failed.
Right.
But, you know, how many times have you seen somebody's Facebook account get hacked or something by one of their friends or an ex-girlfriend or boyfriend or whatever that they had originally given the password to?
Oh, yeah, all the time. I thought you were going to say, like, because, you know, on portable devices, too, you leave it somewhere, it's logged into all your accounts in the different various apps or through the web page. So, you know, just by leaving your phone behind, people can pick it up and do a password reset and then put it back down. You don't even know. Yeah,
and, you know, a lot of people will share the unlock code for their phone with their friends.
Yeah. Or spouse, like Ange knows mine, so that way she can unlock it for the kids. Yeah.
For you, that multiple logins for Android devices might be nice. One I don't actually have on the list here, but is also, you know, if somebody is shoulder surfing you and sees you type in the unlock code for your phone, you don't necessarily know that they know your password, but they do.
Yeah. That's been the challenge of debit cards for years.
Yeah, and so that kind of fits my next point is eavesdropping. Someone could be listening or watching. You know, they could be running Wireshark on your connection and see all the packets going back and forth, or sniffing the air if you're using Wi-Fi or a mobile connection, and see your password as it goes between your computer and the remote service. A lot of services, like almost everything on the web now, when you log in, uses SSL, but not everything. So be careful of things that aren't using SSL. But also a lot of older protocols, like FTP doesn't use SSL.
Right.
And FTP is still very popular, especially for web hosting. Right? So if you're using your web hosting and you log into it and you to upload some files to your website or whatever, if somebody's listening with Wireshark on your side or the server side, they can see your username and password. Highly likely that username and password is the same one that logs you into the control panel for your web hosting. And that control panel for your web hosting is probably the one that controls the email addresses on your domain.
And your accounts.
And then you can reset the password for the email if it's not already the same because of password reuse. And then now they have your email account. And now they can reset your Twitter and your Facebook and so on and so on. Right? So not everything is encrypted, and so you have to be cognizant of that. Then you have exposure, which is one someone mentioned in the chat room a couple of minutes ago. This is when you accidentally give away your password. It happens on IRC like once a week. Someone tries to identify and puts a space in front of the command and ends up spewing their password into the chat room.
And then we all laugh.
But it can also happen other ways. People accidentally type their password into the username field on a website or on a computer. Sometimes that'll go into the audit logs, right? So failed login attempt for user some password. And then immediately followed by successful login for username. I wonder if username's password happens to be some password.
Right.
That's why the authentication logs on a lot of Linux systems and Unix systems are restricted to root only, specifically so that you can't see that. But, that's another way. I already said accidentally in the chat room. Another way that people could get that. Another one is sometimes when you're entering your credit card on a site, and they have the field for your credit card number and then the field where you have to put the name that's on the credit card. There's no standard as to which of those fields should come first, and sometimes they'll be backwards on a site, and you won't realize or whatever. Or for whatever reason, you accidentally type your credit card number in the name field and your name in the credit card field.
I do that about once or twice a year at least. I've just going through and just...
I didn't hit submit, but it almost happened to me on... ordering pizza a couple of earlier on the weekend.
Yeah, now that I can do it online, I was just thinking. I think the last time I did it was I was ordering Thai food.
Yeah,
I love Thai food. Love Thai food.
And the problem with that is that in the database maybe they encrypt your credit card number, but they probably don't encrypt your name.
Oh yeah,
because they need to be able to look up when you call and you give them your name or whatever. They can look it up and find the transaction or whatever.
Oh yeah, right.
Well, that means that your credit card number ends up being stored in the database, not encrypted. Because you type now, obviously the transaction is probably not going to go through, but it'll be in some log somewhere, and they may purposely star out the middle of the credit card number. But if you typed your credit card number into the name field, it probably doesn't get that treatment, and now your credit card's sitting on some server somewhere.
Womp womp.
Then there's guessing and inference. When people base their password on a birthday or a pet's name or something else that's easy to guess, somebody can guess it.
Oh, yeah.
If you compile a largish list of keywords about a person, including bands and songs that they like, names of people in their family and their friends, important dates, sports teams they like, that kind of stuff.
Yep, sports team for sure.
If you made a big list of all that, then fed that through something like John the Ripper that makes variations automatically, like adding leet speak, adding random symbols and numbers and all that stuff to make a huge dictionary, and then tried that against like an online or offline attack, very likely that you're going to compromise a lot of people's passwords. Just from what we've seen, with some databases where we've looked at the top 100 passwords from the LinkedIn compromise or something.
Or the Gawker one, yeah.
Yeah. Not LinkedIn was a lot more professional ones. People I need a new job and stuff. But
Gawker was poop.
But some of the other ones we've seen have been like people's girlfriends' names.
Yeah.
And stuff.
Love 1 2 3.
All that kind of stuff. And so it's with that kind of information, you can definitely compromise someone's password. I had another point about that. It's in that different one. Okay. In addition to guessing, there's also inference. If you manage to figure out that Bob's password for his Gmail is Bob is great at Gmail. Right? So he has a password he uses on every site, but he adds like the site name and a symbol to the end of it.
Yeah, you get a system figured out.
Yeah. So if you use any kind of system or process for coming up with your password, it's likely if somebody compromises one or two of the passwords, they can figure out the pattern, right? So if you know that that's his password for Gmail, then you could probably guess that his Facebook password is bobisgreat@Facebook, right?
Right.
And through that, you've now compromised all of his accounts. You can go and get his Twitter and so on and so on. So yeah, if there's a pattern or system to your passwords, that's not a good thing. Because once somebody compromises one or two of those, then they have all of them. Another one is keylogging. When an attacker using hardware or software is able to record the keys as you press them on your keyboard.
And we've seen that. Remember we saw that via, well, our Cryptic Studios thought they were seeing that via malware, and it was capturing players' passwords, and then they thought they were getting compromised that way. Yeah,
they thought that's what it was, but it wasn't. But there are cases where that has happened. We see that with like banking Trojans and stuff. So you might think an app like LastPass would save you from that, but oftentimes password vault programs like LastPass will use the OS's API to simulate you typing the keys, because that's the most compatible way to enter the password into the application. So if a software keylogger that's hooked into that, it's going to see it anyway.
And if it's not doing that, it's probably using the clipboard, and you could just have something monitoring the clipboard, right?
Exactly. Right? There's only so many ways for LastPass to inject the password into your browser or other app. And because of that, those are vulnerable to being sniffed. So your computer has to be secure on top of your passwords. Man-in-the-middle attack. We've talked quite a bit about these, but it's an attack that intercepts your traffic and basically pretends to be the service you're trying to connect to, or proxies your connection between it and the service you're trying to get to, so that it can inject or change any of that. Even if it's encrypted, possibly. Basically, SSL and TLS are designed to prevent a man-in-the-middle attack by verifying the identity of the remote server. However, we've seen certificate authorities being compromised and issuing fake certificates. But also, there's a tool called SSL strip that we've talked about that basically sits on the man-in-the-middle attack and tricks the version of the web page you see has all the connections over SSL stripped out. And then when you log in with your username and password not over SSL, then the man-in-the-middle box actually connects to Gmail or whatever over SSL and sends that username and password. But it gets to keep a copy in the meantime. So you don't notice anything, right? Because you log into Gmail and it works fine, even though Gmail requires SSL. Your browser just doesn't see the SSL ever because it's done at the man-in-the-middle step. So it's still possible for your communications to be intercepted. That's why Firefox and others are working on this protocol called, HSTS, where a website will say, I will always have SSL. So if you ever see this without SSL, somebody's using SSL strip on you. And then, we talked about, I think it was last week, about Firefox seeding that list because
you're right.
If someone's already doing this to you, the HSTS won't protect you because it relies on the site saying, hey, I'm always going to have SSL. And if you're being stripped before you visit the site the first time, then you're never going to get that.
And Chrome does that too.
Yeah. And Chrome also added, for Google, they said, SSL certificate is only ever going to come from this certificate company. And so if you see it from someone else, it's probably fake. Another one is phishing. Right? It's an email that's sent to you that looks like it's from an official source, whether that's eBay, PayPal, your bank, whatever. And you click a link and it prompts you to log in to a page that looks exactly like your bank or PayPal. But when you type in your username and password, you've now just given those to the attacker. Now, if you combine something like that with, say, weak DKIM keys, like we talked about, I think it was 2 weeks ago, PayPal was only using 768-bit keys, and I think eBay was only 512 and Google was only 512 and so on, meant that somebody could factor that key and send an email that your email client would say, no, this is definitely legitimately from PayPal, even when it's not. And then you apply that with compromised certificate authority issuing fake certificates, a man-in-the-middle DNS attack, whatever. You can actually go in your browser, type https://PayPal, right? Which is, the recommended way to do it, because if you type in the URL properly, then you're going to end up on the right site, right? You demand SSL and enter the URL manually. Don't click a link that might actually be a different URL.
Right.
But if your DNS is being hijacked and it's a fake SSL certificate and the email's signed with a fake DKIM key or whatever, then all of a sudden you're going to the actual PayPal site, but it's not actually PayPal.
Trap. It's a trap.
Yeah. Another one is a replay attack. This is when the attacker is able to capture you authenticating to some service over the wire, and then is able at a later time to resend the same steps and log in as you again. Things like SSL work to limit this, right? There's a timestamp included in the packet, and it's signed so that if the timestamp was tried to be updated, it would make the signature wrong, and so on. But some protocols are open to replay attacks, where you could use the same hash or whatever way the authentication happens at a later date, and it would let you in. The biggest threat to passwords is obviously reuse. People using the same password on multiple sites.
Yeah, for sure.
If one of those gets compromised, then that's all of them. They have everything. So, we keep telling you, use LastPass.
Yes. It won't solve the issue of key monitoring, but it will solve the issue of one password for all your sites.
Right.
And that's pretty important.
Yeah. Another problem is secret questions. So when you set up a new account and it prompts you for some secret question and answer, consider carefully what you put down. You're going to need to be able to remember it later. So if you just make something up and you don't remember what the answer is later, or if the question is, what was the name of your first grade teacher, and for an answer you make something up, are you going to remember that 2 years, 3 years from now?
I do not.
Fake answer?
That has bitten me. I do not.
Yeah. So while it's advisable not to answer the question directly, you have to remember what you did put down, right?
Mm-hmm. And then if you lie, you just use the same lie all the time, which is almost just as good as telling the truth. But
right, but you have to be able to remember the lie.
Yeah,
and that's a problem. In the original article, it was like, what was the make of your first car or whatever, and it was like camper van Beethoven something. So they put the right answer, and then they added something funny onto the end, which is fine as long as they remembered that, right? Because you're going to need to remember this later on if you need to regain access to the account. Or on some accounts, like my bank, if it's the first time I've logged in on a different computer or from a different IP address, it asks me one of the secret questions anyway.
Yes.
So
Steam
these are
does
not
that. Steam kind of does something kind of like that.
And SOTOR does as well.
Yeah,
and so if it's the secret questions aren't necessarily only for when you forget your password. So you need to know what the answer is. You can't just make up a random, you can't just mash the keyboard thinking, oh, I'm never going to need this, because they may actually require it for regular logins. But if it's something simple that someone could look up via Google or Facebook, it's not good enough, right?
Like your high school mascot.
Yeah, it's something pretty easy to look up, or even, what's the name of your high school or whatever. But also remember that the attacker could be someone you know. So, maybe they went to the same high school, or they're from the same area and know what the high school's mascot is. But also, some people are depending on their Facebook privacy settings. Like, oh, people can't figure out stuff from my Facebook because it's locked down to only my friends. Well, if your friend is one of the attackers, they will have access to all the information you put into your Facebook, and they can figure out what was your grandma's first name or something, or all this kind of stuff like that. Because, just because you've locked down your Facebook privacy settings doesn't necessarily mean you're safe.
And those things can change. We've seen them change. And then, stuff goes public. And where did that go? Yeah.
And then the biggest one is social engineering. This is where either you're tricked into giving someone your password over the phone, which hopefully nobody falls for anymore. But in the case of Matt Honan, the problem was actually, the weak link was actually AppleCare. They very much wanted to be helpful and allow him to recover his account. The only problem is the person who was calling AppleCare was not Matt Honan, but the attacker, who managed to guess and trick his way through security questions and so on to gain access to the Apple and Amazon accounts. In the article, there's a little sidebar that has the conversation back and forth with Apple. And it's funny that, when he needed to delay to try to look up the answer to the question they were asking, he's like, oh, my dinner's burning. I have to take care of it. I'll be right back.
Oh, really? And he would just look it up right there on the spot?
Yeah.
Wow.
Or, it's like, what's your best friend's name or whatever. And he's just like guessing people that worked at Wired and stuff. And he's like, no, that's not it. And
It's
like at some point, Apple should have stopped letting him try, I think.
Yeah, because like he keeps giving them the wrong number, and they're like,
and the wrong answers and stuff.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, that's not right. And they eventually get down, it's like, oh, what's one of the folders in your email account? And he just guesses, oh, one of them might be called Apple, because I'm a reporter and I do stuff about Apple all the time. And like, yep, that's one of them.
You can see he's just going off names.
And why is Apple looking in your email account? Or why does Apple have the ability to look in your Apple email account and see what folders there are and maybe what emails there are? This is a random support person.
He says, give me the name of some of your custom mail folders. And he says, the guy says, Google, Gmail, Apple. I think I'm a programmer at Google. And then Apple says, okay, Apple is correct. Can I have an alternate email address for you? So he just gives him one of the names of his mail folders.
Yeah. And especially when it's just a generic one like Apple. How many people have an Apple account might have a folder Apple for all the Apple spam they get?
From all the crap I get from Apple.
Yeah. But more scary is why Apple can look in your email account and see what folders there are.
Oh, yeah. Especially
not
like just
to this topic, but it's just like, what else can a random Apple Care support person see about your email account?
Yeah. Jeez.
But anyway.
Let me just look in there for you real quick. I'll just take a peek in there.
Also, I put links up to 2 of my older articles, one at Geek Roundtable and one at AppFail, about password security and misconceptions about passwords and so on. They talk about some things like, policies that make people change their password every 30 days usually do more harm than good, and a bunch of different things like that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Because, I used to work for a place that had an every 30-day password policy. Have you ever had to do that? Have you ever actually had to do it? It's such a pain in the ass. 30 days goes by so fast.
It does. I've only had places that were like once a semester or something.
90 days, I think, is a little more like at the bank I worked at for 6 years. It was 90 days.
90 days is more reasonable. Because the important thing is to make sure people aren't just, tacking a new number on the end of the password. It's like, my password is blah 7, and then blah 8, and then blah 9.
And when I got into IT security at that bank, we were cracking our own passwords. It's just like to check our security. And password 123, password 12345, password 1234567 would be people would just iterate or something. It was
and you get things like that. And so, or people just switching back and forth between 2 passwords.
Yes,
that's why a lot of those password changing systems now have a history where they remember your last 12 passwords and you can't reuse them.
Right.
Interesting thing there is, what if that's the database that gets compromised? You then have... Now, the whole point, the main point of making you change your password every 90 days, on top of, if it accidentally got disclosed or whatever, the original idea was that way if someone was cracking it, by the time they cracked the password, that wouldn't be the password anymore. But if they have the list of the last 10 passwords, and they've cracked all of them and figured out the pattern you're using, they're able to predict what the password is for the next month, the month after that, the month after that, and so on.
Yeah. Yeah, and then they'll just keep doing that.
Yeah.
So, Allan, you have you have a lot of notes people can go check out.
Yeah. But basically, these issues are endemic across the entire internet, right? This is happening everywhere. And so it's important that you're aware of all the different ways your password can be the weak link and what the other weak links can be, so you can try to shore them up.
I feel like for a lot of people, passwords started out as these things that we were aware of and wanted to be safe about, but then as online services begin to offer more and do more and know more about us, like, we're still kind of using the same system to protect that we came up with way, way, way long time ago, and that stuff wasn't very important. But that same key,
when it was just an account for some online game or something you weren't worried about. But now, that online game has your credit card and, your Google
balance
account
on there. And
your Google account used to not be that important, and now it knows everything about you.
Right.
And, it's tied not just to your Google, but to your Gmail and your
Android devices and
all your Android devices and your YouTube account and everything.
Yeah, it's something that people just every now and then need to take a step back and really think about.
Yep.
And it's something that we've seen a lot of conversation in the TechSNAP audience recently too. So I'm glad we covered that. Any other thoughts on that?
So they did a comparison of two of the big password dumps. I'm not sure which two.
Okay.
But basically, they found that 50% of the passwords on either list were also on the other list.
Helpful.
So more than half of all the passwords used on these two big sites were the same as someone else's password on the other site. You know, your password should be totally unique, if at all possible.
Right.
And so it just shows that the problem of people reusing passwords is getting worse, not better.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because they have more passwords to take care of.
People that watch TechSNAP are moving away from reusing their passwords.
Right.
But there's lots of people that don't watch TechSNAP and just reuse their passwords for everything.
And they're just average users, and now they have more passwords than they've ever had to have before. Yeah. And it's just, it's overwhelming. I mean, I see a lot of people that just put their passwords right on their monitor with a sticky note.
Yep.
Or under the keyboard. That's common when I sit down. Like if I sit down and the staff member isn't there, and like their screen's locked, before I give up, I always lift the keyboard because it's so commonly there.
My grandfather had a little notebook beside his desk with all site name, password. Site name.
Yes. I have a family member that does that too. And you just sit down, well, let me go take care of that for you. Just open up the book and go log in as them.
At his house, maybe that's secure enough for what he needed.
Yeah. For him at his house, yeah.
Yeah.
And if he could do more complex passwords because of it, it's probably a win.
Right.
That's true.
But, at the office, that's a big no-no.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's important to have a long and strong password. But you also have to consider all the other ways someone could compromise that account. And, if the weakest link is the secret questions, then you need to address that. And so on and so on. Mm-hmm. If you have the option, you should probably consider two-factor authentication. It adds one more step for the attacker to have to jump through. And it makes it harder for them.
I've tried it on Google over the years. I keep turning it on and off.
Yeah, it's like I have it on SOTOR on my phone, and sometimes I'm just like, I have to click and then type in an extra number. And then I'm like, oh, right, it's worth it.
Right. So the problem with Google and stuff like that is when you have applications that have to log in but don't support two-factor, you have to do these like weird extra temporary one-time passwords that give you access to anything, and then what's the point? And
yeah. And so that's why external things like that should be using something like OAuth with a system where you can revoke access for individual apps, and instead of them actually using your password and two-factor. But remember that just because you have two-factor doesn't mean you're secure necessarily. We've seen RSA and Blizzard both have their authenticators compromised when the database of all their seed values was compromised. Right? Mm-hmm. So just because you have an authenticator doesn't mean you're immune to attack.
Right.
They could use social engineering and say they lost their authenticator and get the company to reset the password and disable the authenticator or whatever. Or there was some talk about somebody being able to clone somebody's authenticator.
Yes.
I did a post about that 3 or 4 months ago probably. And a bunch of different ones like that. So, that doesn't necessarily solve the problem either.
We need to get rid of passwords is what you're saying.
Yeah, but what are you going to replace them with?
I don't know.
Because if you just have, just an authenticator or a token or something, that's easier for someone to steal than a password possibly.
And if it's a finger or an eyeball, somebody could steal that.
And those scanners are just not reliable enough.
Yeah.
You get a cut on your finger and you can't log in.
Yeah.
Or, somebody... the Mythbusters did a whole thing on stealing people's fingerprints off like a CD jewel case and using that to log in as them through different fingerprint scanners.
Yeah, maybe I'm kind of reading the chat room. Some people are saying image passwords, and then you have
basically
local
the best
host.
one is a combination, right? Having a password and an image password.
Past paragraphs with an image or something like that, maybe?
Yeah. It's like as an anti-phishing thing, my bank has a thing where you enter your account number, then you get to a different page, and they show you a picture you've selected from a list of pictures and a phrase you've given the bank but no one else. And only when you see the right picture and the right phrase do you type in the password box. Right? So if there's ever a phishing scam against that bank, when I get there, they're not going to know what my picture is or what my phrase is, and so I won't type my password in the box. Now, that's not protecting the password anymore, but that is anti-phishing, at least. So, if they change that so that there were I had to pick from a panel of pictures and pick the right one every time, then that might help. But that wouldn't help against phishing, and it would actually give away information to the phishing. So it's, a big trade-off thing.
Mm-hmm.
The Skype password thing is next. But first, we have a message from GoDaddy.
Yes, why don't we do that? Why don't we say thanks to GoDaddy for sponsoring this week's episode after that epic story? So thank you to GoDaddy and Allan. I was telling you on the pre-show, we have one of our best deals ever, folks. So listen to this. If you want to get... This is crazy, because we already had a great deal. We already had a really good deal. This is crazy. This is crazy, and it applies to transfers. Get ready for this. $4.95 when you use our code TECH495. Now, this discount applies to new and transfer domains up to 10 registration years. Offer may not be used for renewals, however. Of course, just think about this. Think about this. $4.95 for a .com domain.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have something to transfer, now is the time. If you've been thinking...
If any of your domains are anywhere else, transfer them to GoDaddy and save a butt ton of money on top of getting the better interface.
I was sitting here scratching my head, like $4.95. Can I just think of something? Like a show, like a future show topic name or title of something?
I might someday want to do a show about blah, so I'm going to buy blah.com right now.
$4.95. So maybe what I'll get everybody in my family for the Christmas is their own .com.
Yeah. Super cheap.
So thank you to GoDaddy. Also, just sort of as Veterans Week, it is kind of Veterans Week, right? Veterans Day was earlier
we call
this
it
week.
Remembrance Day in Canada and the UK. But
so our equivalent of that just passed, and GoDaddy is doing for the holidays a donation drive to help armed service members who were injured. So the Bob Parsons and Renee Parsons Foundation and GoDaddy.com, we've matching up to $1 million for folks who donate, and they've raised $360,000 so far. I just want to give it a plug since it is the season right now, and if anybody out there has active service members or past service members, might be something to consider doing. And, thank you to GoDaddy for the longtime support of the TechSNAP program and that great code, TECH495, to get a .com for $4.95. Now, if you're doing something else and you just want to take 20% off your entire order, we also still have Go20 off 5, which saves you 20% off what you're doing. There's just some ways to save some money.
That one I'm pretty sure does work for renewals.
Yes.
So if you have renewals, hurry up and use that one before it expires.
Si, senor. That would be my advice. All right, Allan, so you just teased it before we started. There's a Skype story we need to talk about, isn't there?
Yes.
What's going on?
Was it yesterday or the day before?
Yes, yesterday.
Well, I think the actual story is the day before. But anyway.
Right.
Maybe not. Maybe it was yesterday. Anyway. Anyone can take over your Skype account if they knew your email address.
What?
Anybody that knew your email address could steal your Skype account. Now, I wish I had found this about 2 hours earlier before they fixed it, because there's a Skype account that nobody's using, but the name is taken that I would really like to have. Anyway, so an attacker found a way to bypass the authentication system in Skype's password reset system and be able to take over any target account for which the email address was known. So basically, you go over to Skype's website and you register for a new account with just some throwaway name you don't care about. And as the email address for that account, you put in the email address of the victim, the person whose account you're trying to steal. Then you log into the Skype client using that new account because you just created it, so you know the username and password. Then you go to the Skype website again and you initiate a password reset on the victim's account. So you type in the email address and that starts a password reset. Now, because the password reset is based on email address, Skype is going to initiate the reset for both accounts. But basically, they're going to send a secret token to the email address and say, click here and we'll reset your password for you. The other thing they did, though, was it would send a notification to all logged in Skype's accounts that were with that email address saying, here's the secret token.
To the Skype client.
Yeah.
So if I just have to be logged into Skype, I get the reset.
So if you're the attacker and you're logged into the second account using the same email address, you also get the token. And then use the token to reset the password for the victim account.
Yeah, of course.
Then log into once you've done that, you can change the victim account's password and then log in and remove the victim's email address and add your own. Right? So you add yours, switch it to the primary, remove the original email account.
That's dirty.
And now the victim can't get their account back.
Allan, that's not even a bug. I mean, that sounds like a design flaw because, first of all...
Yeah, it's a way to get around having to actually get the token from the email address.
Well, but also letting you use a email address and sign up for an account that's already taken. And how does that work?
Because the Skype has a username. So basically it's two different usernames using the same email address.
Yeah.
Which normally would be fine.
I guess I see. So like if I wanted to have multiple Skype accounts but all tie it back to one email address for stuff. Okay. Yeah. All right. Okay.
But the problem is that the password reset system doesn't ask for the username, only the email address.
Yeah.
Therefore, sends the token to all of those accounts.
Fatal flaw.
But mostly it doesn't make any sense why it pops up the token in the logged in client. So basically, a couple hours after this was posted online, Skype disabled the password reset system and started fixing the issue. And once it was fixed, they re-enabled the password reset system. Specifically, tokens are no longer displayed to logged in Skype clients, only sent to the email address, which makes sense. I question why it was ever the other way around.
Right.
Because if you're logged in to your Skype, like in a client, then you probably haven't forgotten your password.
Maybe they were thinking for people who auto log in, and then they wanted to like log into the website. So, I got to reset the password so you can log into the website.
And sometimes the email takes a little while to get there, and so if you're logged into the account, sure. But basically,
not thinking that
they should have had it locked it down to asking for the username as well. Although there are people that forgot their username, but then in that case, have it just do the email. So yeah, there's basically a little logic flaw there in Skype's setup.
Yeah.
But it's fixed now. So then I have a link here to Skype's response about the issue. And then thenextweb.com had a nice article about the original one and then a follow-up when Skype had fixed it a couple hours later.
Kind of like, surprise, Microsoft, you inherited yourself some bad engineering. I mean, that's really what that seems like to me. That's like...
Well, that might have actually been something new.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you.
I'm pretty sure before you couldn't have two accounts with the same email address.
Okay, so this
might be part of their work to make it so they can integrate MSN.
So
and transfer
I
overall
did
to MSN
read
account.
I did read a story that made it sound like this has only been around for a couple of months, but I wasn't sure why. That I might do a little digging on that because that is pretty interesting, isn't it?
But I think it might be part of Microsoft's moves to combine MSN.
Live,
and
Messenger, and Skype.
So you'd have an MSN login and a Skype login. If they happen to share the same email address, rather than have to deal with the collision, they'll just both exist. And then maybe you'll have the option to combine them or whatever. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that this wasn't possible before. So it's not like this has been around for years and no one discovered it.
Gotcha.
It seems like it's a recent change and someone just noticed that.
Pretty bad one. Pretty bad change, my friend. All right, well, check out the links to the follow-up story. If you're a big Skype user, it might be something worth reading about. And what's interesting is they, you got to give them credit. I guess because it was all service-side, they didn't have to do any patches. They did fix it pretty quick when they were alerted to it. It wasn't one of those things they sat on. So that's something, right? Right?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Okay, Allan. Well, with all the news done, then I think that means it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or clicking that contact link at the top of our website or starting a thread in our subreddit like Barbara Wobble did, who is our first submitter this week. Allan, are you ready for that question?
Yep.
Here we go. He writes in, he says, I just bought some server hardware and I'm wondering how to run this thing. It'll be my only home server. So it will be file storage, possibly a firewall, and some own cloud, that kind of thing. I'm a GNU Linux person. Mainly, I've never used any BSD OS. My options seem to be run Linux, possibly with LLVM, learn FreeBSD, possibly using jails for any Linuxy stuff that I need, or use the FreeBSD kernel on top of Debian, which I think that'd be crazy, so I'd say don't even do that, because he really wants to use ZFS. Any suggestions? Keep in mind, I don't have a lot of time to learn FreeBSD, so that's something to consider. Cheers.
Most of the stuff you're going to need to do is going to be almost the same as doing it on Linux, so there's not going to be that much of a learning curve. Like NFS works pretty much exactly the same. Samba works the same, although installing Samba would be a little bit different, but the package system in FreeBSD is pretty simple to figure out. And yeah, ZFS on Linux, the version from Lawrence Livermore is getting better, but yeah, you probably want FreeBSD.
I wonder if ZFS is a requirement, then I'd say yeah, but if he's a Linux head, why not just go with what he's comfortable with?
Yeah, if you have... if you're not dealing with more than a couple of terabytes, then you probably don't need ZFS. If you don't have at least 8 gigabytes of RAM, you might consider not using ZFS. 2 is probably enough, but the more the better.
Okay.
Although FreeBSD is the easiest to make it also be a file server and firewall and stuff. It's like, now I'm experienced with it, but I can turn a blank machine into a FreeBSD firewall / file server, whatever, in 2 hours or less. It's pretty simple.
Yeah. There's good guides, so either way, he could always start it in a VM if he just wanted to save time and see if he can build it out and then go reproduce it. And the nice thing is you could screw that all up. You could really just screw it up, and then before you go put it on production, then you get it figured out. That might be something to try.
Rawzone in the chat room was talking about the shells on FreeBSD behaving differently. You can just install bash if that's what you're used to.
That's what I do, just to make it easier on myself.
Like, the default shell for our customers on our server is bash because it keeps them from complaining.
Yeah.
The config system I like on FreeBSD better. It's a little easier. There's no commands to do it. It's just lines in a text file.
Yeah.
The network interfaces having different names can actually be helpful. If you have 3 different NICs in a Linux machine and they're called ETH0, 1, and 2, how do you know which one's which? Whereas in FreeBSD, you have like IGB for Intel Gigabit or like BGE for Broadcom Gigabit.
But what if you have like 3 Intel Gigabits?
Well, then you have IGB 0, 1, 2, 3.
It's kind of the same problem, right?
Yes. But, instead of naming them for the protocol, they're named for the driver. I
do kind of like that idea, because if you do have different models, that would be very nice.
Like my home file server has one Atheros, which is ALC, which I always try to say is ACL because whatever.
Yeah, I can see that.
It'd be really interesting to write an ACL that talked about the interface ALC. And then the other one is an EM0, which is an Intel Gigabit.
Yeah, okay. I was going to say EM0. I actually thought that's just what FreeBSD called them, because
No, that's the Pro 1000 Intels. The newer Intel server ones are IGB, which is better.
Okay.
It has multiple queues per interface, so that the card can make use of your multiple processors better.
Oh, nice.
Yes, much more performant.
Yeah.
Especially when you have like 24 CPUs, like my new server does.
All right, let's go to the next question. Then it comes in from C. He says he has a home server swap question for us. It's a home server episode. I didn't even know. Who knew?
So basically, his question was he has a home server and he has some newer hardware that's better.
Yeah.
So he wants to move the hard drive over to the new machine.
He wants to know, can he swap MOBO, processor, chipsets, and things like that?
Linux and FreeBSD are pretty agnostic to this. They enumerate the devices when you boot them up. It's not like Windows where you're going to run into problems. So mostly it'll work. If it's FreeBSD, if the network card changed, you might have to edit a config file. The other one is your FSTab file may change if the hard drives get plugged in a different order. If you weren't using labels, then which drive is like SDA 0 or which drive is like ADA 2 or whatever might change if you plug the drives in a different order. But if you use the labels in either FreeBSD or Linux, then the labels will line up correctly and you'll be fine. So other than the possibility of you having to change your FSTab or your network config to match the different device names or whatever, it should mostly just be the same.
Yep. That's always been pretty much.
If you change from like 32-bit to 64-bit or something, you may consider upgrading the OS to the different version or whatever.
That's going to get trickier possibly,
yeah. Mostly you only run into a problem if you try to take a 64-bit system and run it on a 32-bit CPU. The other way around will work fine, although you may get more performance by upgrading it properly.
Yeah.
But in general, it's really not an issue.
All right, Allan. So just a FYI to folks, Jay was following up on that story we did about the status page on Apache servers being available, and he has some links to a talk at DEF CON for some penetration tests that were going on. For sake of time,
talk about Shodan, which is a search engine. We talked about it a bit when we talked about some of the SCADA systems. Basically, it's a search engine for all the banner information that
isn't that funny?
That apps give away. So like when you connect to a mail server, it normally tells you the version of the mail server program, right? Or if you connect to SSH, it tells you some stuff about the SSH server. So Shodan is basically a search engine of all those. And the researcher in the case of the SCADA systems just did a Shodan search for, this model name and found all these devices that he knew he could compromise. Because if you connect to them, they tell you their MAC address, and they have a fixed password account on it that is based on the MAC address.
That just drives me so crazy.
Shodan would let you, if you found some vulnerability in a certain version of WordPress or Apache or whatever, you can use Shodan to search for all other sites using the same version.
That's pretty fun. So we'll put a link to that.
Yep.
And, as all this stuff gets connected to the web, it's all going to be out there. All right. So the next email comes in from James, and he says, ahoy, chaps. I like that. Totes love the show. I'm a long-time listener, first-time emailer. I was hoping for some advice from Allan. I've just set up a FreeBSD home server. Look at this. This is great. They're all home server questions. And I'm unsure about the right or best way to keep it up to date. What's the relationship between some of the different tools like FreeBSD Update, PortSNAP, PortMaster, and Port Upgrade, etc.? Any help would be greatly appreciated. Thanks, James.
Yep. First thing, if you go to the FreeBSD handbook, which is freebsd.org/handbook.
Okay.
There's an entire chapter on upgrading FreeBSD. But basically, there's a tool called FreeBSD Update that takes care of updating your the operating system itself. It's chapter 25 in the FreeBSD handbook called Updating and Upgrading FreeBSD. So FreeBSD Update will take care of updating the OS. So that's the kernel and all the userland apps. And then you have to update any packages you installed. So what you normally do for that is you use PortSNAP, which does an update of your ports tree, which gives you all the latest versions of all the apps. So basically, it gives you the package metadata for all the apps. And then there's tools like Port Upgrade or PortMaster that can then go through, find any package you have that are older than the latest version in the ports tree and upgrade them for you. The other option that's becoming an option now in FreeBSD is PackageNG, which is the next generation package system that kind of combines those two processes.
Sure.
But yes, chapter 25 in the FreeBSD handbook tells you everything you need to know about upgrading, including how to do it from source, although you don't really need to do that anymore because FreeBSD Update is much better.
There you go. FreeBSD handbook is a great resource.
Yeah, if you're compiling a custom kernel, then you still need to do the source update. But even FreeBSD Update will update your source tree, and then you just have to recompile your own custom kernel. So unless you're doing some significant change to the source code, FreeBSD Update and PortSNAP with something like Port Upgrade or PortMaster are the way to go.
When I was learning some FreeBSD stuff for the first time, the handbook, unbelievable resource. I was so impressed, and it's it's great.
And I haven't got around to it yet, but I've committed to rewriting the ZFS chapter of the FreeBSD handbook to make it better.
Whoa, you're going to do that?
Yeah.
Jeez, Allan, that sounds like a lot of work.
It is.
All right. Well, let's get to this next question. It's a RAID question, and I think it's one we've answered, but I've actually heard it come in a few times, so I kind of want to get to it. Andrew says, I loved hearing about Allan's ZFS build, but I have this question, and this is the one that I've heard from a few folks now. Why, oh why, did Allan decide to use a hardware RAID with ZFS? Everything I've read recommends that ZFS have direct control over the physical drives, since it's a volume manager, a software RAID, and a file system all integrated into one well-engineered package.
Well, the first misconception there is that I didn't actually use RAID. The controller I use is a RAID controller, but I still pass the disks through individually and let ZFS manage them. So I didn't create like a RAID 5 array and then say, ZFS, you have this one disk to work with, because that would defeat the purpose of ZFS. The reason I used a RAID controller instead of an HBA is because that was what was built into the motherboard on the servers I bought. And the first one, because I basically shop for the controller that would work with FreeBSD, although I eventually learned that I bought the wrong one. Basically, the best controllers are LSIs, and they have HBAs you can get that don't do RAID, and those are much cheaper, so that's what I recommend you get.
Will they? Do you know, will those ones still do battery backup?
Yep, some of them still have batteries. Although, ZFS, you don't need a battery.
Oh, really?
You can enable the battery and get a little more performance, but ZFS doesn't tell you the data is written until it's actually written. So
you don't have
a lot of those features off. Turning those features off on the controller actually helps.
That's incredible.
Well, ZFS is very conservative in that it's most worried about your data actually being there consistent on the disk, less so about speed, right? Everybody brags about ZFS for its speed, but that's not its main feature. Its main feature is that if it says the data is on the disk, it's on the disk, and it's secure, and it's not going to be silently corrupted, and so on.
I want to have ZFS, baby.
But yeah, the reason a couple of my servers have LSI RAID controllers instead of LSI HBA controllers is because I use the one that came built into the motherboard instead of spending more money. They're in pass-through mode, so they're basically the same thing anyway. But yeah, like with the two newest servers, if I buy JBODs for them, basically a second chassis of only disks that you just link into an existing computer instead of having to buy a whole separate server, those will just be plain HBAs. Because, that's what you do if you want to add an extra 140 hard drives.
Jeez, what ways? All right, Alan, now you got me saying Zed. Great.
Yes, ZFS for the win.
American friends will never let me live that down.
Oh, you should have seen me at MeetBSD trying to...
Were people giving you a hard time for the Zed?
Well, it's like, you're in the States right now.
You got to call it that when you're here.
Like me, the British guys, the Australian guys, we're all saying Zed, right?
Yeah. And that's fun. It sticks out, too, when people haven't heard it for a while.
Yes, but the funniest one, though, is, well, I call it ZFS. The other command, Zpool, I say Zpool.
That is not consistent.
Because ZFS is an acronym. You say the letters.
Yeah.
Zpool is a word, so you pronounce it. Right? Like I say MySQL, not MySQL. Right? When it's an acronym, you say the letters.
I can't even argue necessarily on the cool, because Zed sounds pretty cool, too. Z is cool and Zed's cool, so...
Yeah.
I say just call it what you like.
When it's a word, you say it how you would say it, like ZFS. Or, sorry, Zpool.
Right.
But when it's an acronym, right, when all the letters are uppercase, you pronounce the letters, not slur them together into a word.
Right. So you say. All right, Alan. Our next question comes from Alex. He has a question about MD5 sums. He says, I went to download VirtualBox today and noticed that under the MD5 hash downloads, they state that this following. The SHA 256 checksum should be favored as the MD5 algorithm must be treated as insecure. And they say, why would MD5 security be important to verify a download? What would be the harm of someone cracking this? It's not like it's hashing a password or anything. Thanks for the great show. Thank you, Alex.
See, you don't need to, in this case, it's not a password that you would crack. The MD5 hash there is telling you whether, basically you do the MD5 hash of the file you download and compare it to the one on the website to tell if it's the same file, right? Because under secure conditions, the hash could only be the same if the file hadn't been altered, right? But MD5 has a weakness. It's called the birthday attack. And it's been just demonstrated before where someone could make two different files that contain different stuff but had the same MD5 hash. I think one of the first examples was they wrote up these two PDF documents. Originally, they were like orders from Caesar to one of his generals or whatever. And the one version said the official thing was signed by Caesar, and it had an MD5 hash. And then there was another order that said to do something wrong, and it looked like it was signed by Caesar, and the two different PDF files that said completely different things had exactly the same MD5 hash. So you could be tricked if you use just MD5. And that's why you should use at least SHA-256 sums for verifying files. And why you should actually bother to verify. A couple of weeks ago, remember the PHP MyAdmin, the archive on a couple of SourceForge's mirrors had a virus in it.
Yeah.
And if people didn't verify the SHA-256 sum after they downloaded it, they might have installed the version that had a virus. But yes, MD5 is not good enough for anything anymore. Stop using it.
Oh! All right, there you go. That's the official word. Alan says, stop it. Stop it. All right, Alan, our last email comes in from Michael, and he's got a multi-MySQL backup question. He says, thanks for the amazing shows. Here's a little background. He's got a PHP MySQL application running on top of Apache servers across multiple servers, all being load balanced by LVS. For the database, we're currently running a multi-master MySQL cluster, which consists of 2 servers, and are unsure how we should be performing backups. Currently, the backups are off of the second DB server using Percona Extra Backup. Because this is usually the slave, but it isn't always the case if the first DB server fails and the second has to become from the primary. Should we change our current backup strategy so that backups are performed on both servers? What about adding a third server that's read-only, sort of like a slave, and then perform backups off of that? Any suggestions would be greatly appreciated.
Right. The nice thing about Percona Extra Backup is that you can get a consistent backup online, which is good. Basically, your main issue with doing the backup off the second server is possibly that when it's the master, doing the backup will slow the site down too much.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, the best way to do it is to have a read-only slave that you're using only for backups, because it also means its binary log can be used if you say you do a backup even once an hour, that still means you could lose up to an hour of data.
Right.
So if you have the binary logs, you can play back everything that happened after the backup.
Right.
Through those binary logs.
Yeah, that's true.
So yes.
And you could do something like that in a VM. You don't have to dedicate a whole box to it.
So basically what you're doing is good enough, but having a dedicated slave is better.
Yeah.
So yeah, Percona Extra Backup is the right tool. Basically, the reason why my original setup involved a read-only slave was because I wasn't using Percona Extra Backup, so the only way to get a consistent backup was to have the slave stop replicating, and then that would give me a database that was in a perfect snapshot state, and then back that up the old-fashioned way.
Back it up. There you go.
And which ways... the separate slave is probably slightly better, especially if you're using MyExam still, because it's harder to get a consistent snapshot there than it is with something like InnoDB. But also, for both of them, you're going to have performance issues if you're doing a backup on a live database.
Yes.
So doing it on a separate slave is easier. That slave can be on the same machine, but it's probably better if it's not, because otherwise you're probably still hurting the...
Yeah. I guess if the site isn't under heavy load, that might be another way.
But it depends. If the restricted factor is the disk that the database is on, you don't want to be thrashing it by writing everything twice.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah.
If you're using two database servers for speed, not just for redundancy, then it's entirely possible that trying to run the slave off of the same machine is not going to help.
Yeah.
Although, you probably have a third machine somewhere that's doing something unrelated that could easily be the slave.
Yeah.
The slaves usually don't have as much load because the slaves run only one thread, so they're only running one query at a time. Whereas a master, it's got multiple reads and multiple writes happening at the same time. But a slave is only going to have one write at a time. And so the load's not going to be as high.
So good luck, Michael.
Yep.
Hope we get that taken care of. All right. Well, you can email a question. We didn't get to quite all of them, but I think we got to most of them. You can email them to TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or even better, just start a thread over on our Reddit at links.techsnap.tv. And then some other folks can chime in there, and they'll probably even answer your question before we get a chance to talk about it here on the show, because it takes us a week, where they can just answer right that day. And you can also hit the contact link at the top of jupiterbroadcasting.com. But Allan, with all the feedback done, that means it's time for us to chug right along to the TechSNAP Roundup. And welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that don't quite fit to the very top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, maybe give you some links to follow up on your own. And many of these links were supplied by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Allan, are you ready for our first Roundup story, sir?
Yep.
All right. It's coming from the Origin Gaming Service, which is what? EA owns them, correct?
Yeah, it's basically EA's version of Steam.
Yeah, which I think the only time I've ever had to use it was for like SOTOR. I think. I can't remember why.
Of like Battlefield 2,
yeah, okay.
Battlefield 2142.
Or maybe it was Diablo. It might have been Diablo 3. I can't remember.
No, Diablo 3 was Blizzard, wasn't it?
Yeah. I have no idea why I said that.
Anyway.
Anyways, they had a password compromise.
Apparently.
Yeah, sure.
So if you have an account there, you need to go reset the password, which I guess I should do.
Yes, me too. All right, we're blasting through because we have a huge roundup this week.
Yes. So Stack Exchange, which is the site that runs Stack Overflow, Server Fault, all the other.
Love those guys.
They're great question answer sites. They have a podcast, and they were talking about Hurricane Sandy and the efforts to keep the Pier 1 data center online. Oh. Because that's where Stack Exchange is hosted.
Yes, that's probably a great podcast. That'd be all right. Yes. I'll grab that.
So they were some of the people that were on the ground carrying the stuff up the stairs and so on. And they talk about, remember we talked about how the management of the building was like, kicked everyone out and wouldn't let the guys come in and help?
Yeah.
It gets some of the explanation of what happened there and why and so on.
Oh, okay. So that's episode 36, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes if you guys want to catch that.
Yep.
Throw that. I didn't even know they had a podcast. So.
Neither did I.
All right.
It's not as old as TechSNAP, so.
Yeah, well, what can you say, Alan? We've been going for 84 strong weeks. Now, this one I thought was, the reason why this caught my attention is because I thought this was already the case. But Google declares that Flash is now fully sandboxed in Chrome for Windows, Mac, and Linux, and Chrome OS. I thought that was the deal when they introduced Chrome in Chrome, or Flash in Chrome. I thought the deal was
I don't know if
sandboxed.
it was the same for all the different OSs, and yeah, I don't know that much. I don't actually use Chrome. I don't know why.
Fully sandboxed, in quotes. Sandboxing helps prevent malware from installing itself on your computer or using what happens in one browser tab to affect another tab. So that's good.
Yep.
Sandbox between tabs even. All right, well, that's not so bad.
That's one of the differences in Chrome is that each tab is a separate process, so there's more of a barrier there than in some other browsers.
And also
I use
more memory.
Firefox still. Mostly because I use a bunch of plugins, including FireGPG, to deal with some encryption, like the customer credit cards and stuff. And so I can't really live without that.
Yeah, there's some good ones. I just end up using both.
Just huge fans. Yeah. I have 4 different profiles under Firefox, including one that's a separate install from back when I needed to still run 3.5 after I had upgraded to 4.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Or 3.6. And it's anyway, they're all upgraded to the new version now, but I have 2 separate installs and 4 separate profiles.
You're connected to that. You're attached.
I guess if you watch next week's folk shows and you see the desktop screenshots, you'll see that one of those profiles just runs monitoring graphs. And so it's open for like weeks at a time with like 100 tabs open. And it works fine, but if I tried to do that in my main browser, it would crash after a couple days.
Yeah.
Although I blame almost all of that on Flash, I assume, because it's the only thing that, keeping tabs, long-lived tabs that are refreshing every 5 minutes are working fine. Mm-hmm. It only seems to be Flash and the advertisements on regular websites that are actually breaking my browser. But anyway.
So you might like the individual tab sandboxing then?
Maybe. But anyway. I don't know. In my screenshots, when you see the tab groups and stuff I have set up in Firefox, you see why I don't change away from Firefox.
Yeah, I love tab groups.
Yeah. So next story is Google reveals the 7 years of evolution of their data center strategy. I haven't read this yet, but I'm definitely going to go to that.
I pulled just a couple of quick highlights. Google talked a little bit about how they've transitioned. They started out in 2005 using containers. Remember how Microsoft was pushing the data center in a container thing, and so was Sun?
And so was Sun for a while.
Yep. But then after that, they transitioned to from that to on-the-shelf designs and all the different individual stages the guy kind of talks about a little bit. It's pretty brief on the CNET article, but it links to other stuff.
Okay.
So all right. So now. I have a story in here about the NSA, and they had a top-secret report that came out. This is posted on Wired.com. And I thought this was just interesting. It came out in the late 90s, or mid-90s, actually. I think it was 95. And this is at a time when Cray was not doing well financially. It was a year before they got bought out. And this report that the NSA published said that they were concerned that supercomputers were going to go away forever. The commercial viability of CRI and the rest of the supercomputing industry is critical, not only to the NSA, but also to the entire Western community. They go on to say that they did get some things right, the NSA. They correctly predicted the rise of IBM and Unix-based systems, that they become important as in the supercomputing space, but they missed the major change that completely reshaped the supercomputing industry, and that was the rise of cheap PCs clustered together and the rise of open source software that powers them.
Yep.
They never saw it coming. They thought supercomputers would only be the way to do big number crunching.
And they're worried that they wouldn't be able to get them and therefore wouldn't be able to crack cryptography.
I wonder if they were trying to make a case to do a bailout. A bailout of great computers.
They were kind of they're worried that because I think as it is, they ended up with they bought some machine from some company that went out of business, and so they never had an operating system to run on it. And so it just sat in the basement for a couple of years until some guy that worked there invented something to run on it.
I see. That's lovely. All right, next story. Telstra routers, their passwords.
Yes, so Telstra, which is an ISP in Australia, shipped routers out to all their customers that have a hard-coded password. So basically, the customer has one password, whatever, but there's a username and password that allows Telstra to log in and admin the modem, and it's the same on every modem, and somebody's figured it out. So that means
I think
anybody
Comcast
with
does
those,
that.
Yeah. So with any, I think there's a list of different places in the article, I think.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, if they all have a hard-coded password like that, anybody can log into anybody's router and wreak havoc, including possibly, oh, well, let's log into somebody's router forward port 3389, which is remote desktop, to, oh, let's look at the DHCP list here, that computer that looks like it's running Windows. And then maybe, you know, if it's some company, maybe you can access their Windows server.
Lovely. Now, I didn't realize you were following the CyanogenMod community very much, but they had like some DNS stuff going on this week, didn't they?
Well, basically, one community member owned the website, cyanogenmod.net or whatever.
Okay.
And
the Android ROM community, we should mention.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a ROM for Android. And basically, the guy that actually controlled the domain was going against the wishes of the rest of the community, including using his control of the domain to make deals and stuff. Basically, pretending it was the whole community. And so, anyway, he tried to blackmail them for the domain, and they're just like, well, we'll just go to .org. See ya.
There you go. So they've made the transition. Although I thought I saw an update they might have gotten it back, but I didn't check that before the show.
I don't know, but, you know, this one's not the same as the story we saw with that website clipping service earlier where somebody stole domain. Mm-hmm. This case, it was somebody who had access to the domain. You know, it's a common problem for any community type thing. Yeah. Is that, you know, typically the domain is controlled by one person, and that person has an inordinate amount of control over everybody.
All right, next story in the roundup, Allan. Adobe hacker says he used SQL injection to grab databases of 150,000 accounts.
Yes, so Adobe has a website called connectusers.com. I don't know what it's actually about, but an attacker used an SQL injection and stole 150,000 accounts, which had username, email address, and an MD5 hash for the password, which means they should be easily cracked. And I would expect, you know, I don't know if that list was made public or not, but if it was, I expect we can find out what the most popular passwords at connectuser.com were next week.
Yeah. All right, the next story, speaking of Blizzard, Blizzard's being sued over BattleNet authentication.
Authenticators, the two-factor authentication token things?
We were just talking about those.
Yes. I didn't read it up on that much, but it seems that somebody's saying that they should be free and they shouldn't have to pay $6 for them or something. Or that Blizzard is making a lot of money off driving people to have these.
$26 million in authenticator sales. In response, Blizzard's made a statement refuting some of the complaints, voicing their intention to vigorously defend themselves in this case. So they're actually being sued.
Basically, if Blizzard security is so bad that you have to have an authenticator to avoid your account being stolen, then, you know, why should you have to pay them? And why should they be making tons of money off authenticators when if they had better security in their app, you wouldn't need an authenticator? Right.
Well, you can see some of their point there, right?
That would be a rather interesting precedent if that actually went through.
I agree.
Because then, you know, anybody could get in trouble for selling authenticators.
It is a slippery slope. And you do maybe...
Well, the interesting is I'm pretty sure most of those authenticators cost more than $5 or $10. You know, like when PayPal started rolling them out, the $5 they charge you for it was just a barrier to entry to keep every single person from asking for one. Right?
I wonder if that's still true.
And
Blizzard might be able to buy them in such a quantity that, you know...
Possibly, but I still think they probably cost a little bit more than that.
Maybe, yeah. I didn't think of that. You might be right. All right. Well, we were talking about SCADA systems earlier, too, in the show. And there's
so there's an interesting one here. So, yeah, we talked about the SCADA systems, how they're being compromised. But we never have that much information on how often they're actually being compromised.
Oh, true, yeah.
So some researchers went through a bunch of public malware infection forums, like bleepingcomputer.com and others. Basically, these are forums where when you get malware, you go there, you run a program called like hijack this or DDS, and it generates a log file about your computer that describes what the malware has done and what settings are changed and so on. And you post that log on this forum, they go through it, and they give you a set of somebody that knows about malware, goes through it, gives you a set of steps and tools needed to disinfect your computer. Well, these researchers scanned through these logs that are publicly available and found a bunch of the computers, people that were posting on these websites were from computers that were running SCADA-specific software.
Like the controller computer?
Software. Yeah. So, you know, that's proof that these computers that run SCADA stuff are getting like run-of-the-mill malware infections.
Of course.
Because they're being, you know, used as web browsing machines with Internet Explorer 6 or something.
I've gone into a popular burger chain as a client of mine, and their payment processing machine was an XP computer that ran the software, and it had a malware infection.
Story, I went to Future Shop. I've seen their system crash and it dumps to an XP desktop.
Yes, yeah. It's crazy. All right.
And, so in that case, there's not very likely that the person behind the till is like browsing websites on the till. But, some of these SCADA machines, like we've talked about, like the prison one, the machine that unlocks all the doors in the prison. And the guard who sits there, whose job it is to open doors when he's asked, is also browsing the internet and getting spyware. And then somebody, if some of that spyware is a remote admin Trojan, some guy that infected that machine, he doesn't have to be trying to get someone out of prison. He's just like, oh, wouldn't it be fun if I just opened all the doors in the prison and see what happens?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'll be on the news.
Yeah. And maybe that guard's not even browsing a website. Maybe he's playing like Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, which has a vulnerability in it.
Yes.
I love this now. Video games, great. Now my video games are screwed up.
Yeah, I think it's something specific with the server.
Okay.
So somebody can connect to the server, do something to compromise it, and cause it to send the compromised stuff to the clients.
You can actually create a remote shell on the game player's computer using this.
Yeah. So it would allow somebody to take over the computers of all the people that connect to this specific game server or whatever.
Yeah, if you're connecting from the server, you have the power to run remote shell commands. Interesting. Wow.
And so on top of the ability to possibly compromise the computer of the gamers, there's a possibility of compromising the servers that the game server is running on, which are often, rented machines at colocation providers and so on. And also the possibility of somehow infecting stuff at the game company and being able to, if you compromise while the developers are testing, you may be able to somehow steal the source code for the game or something with the remote shell.
This sounds like a story that I think was in the TechSNAP subreddit. Didn't quite make it in there, and I think maybe Wicketer in the chat room is making reference to it, but DayZ also had a remote script injection, and there was another game that just recently had a vulnerability. I mean, these games are...
Yeah, like a lot of these games have ability for when you connect to a server for the server to print out a message. And some of them have support for HTML, and then they can get out of hand.
All right. Well, this next story is kind of interesting, and you wonder, when you think of security and encrypting laptops, I don't know if NASA comes to mind, but they're doing it. They're going to encrypt all laptops.
Now, NASA actually has a lot of stuff that's worth a lot of money.
Sure,
right?
Sure, yeah.
And between April 2009 and April 2011, they had 48 mobile computing devices, which is like laptops and cell phones and stuff, that were either lost or stolen.
Ah, okay.
So what they've committed to is that before the end of 2012, they will have all of their laptop hard drives encrypted. And that laptops that contain sensitive information, like some of the ones that have been lost or stolen, will no longer be allowed to leave the facilities. Which is a sensible step, which you wonder why that didn't happen in 2009.
I wonder if we'll be fortunate if NASA will
laptop, share. If a laptop has sensitive information, like people's payroll information or, top secret information, why are you taking it home to browse the web anyway?
Yeah, good question.
Or, why are you taking it to a coffee shop where you're going to leave it and somebody's going to steal it?
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if NASA will be kind enough to share what kind of solution. Maybe they don't have to give us specifics, but like, do they use TrueCrypt? Do they use NTFS encryption? I mean, what are they going to end up using?
I think TrueCrypt is hard to do for like the OS drive because you need the OS to run TrueCrypt.
And on enterprise level, you want something you can take and revoke keys from and all kinds of stuff. And when managers come in, you want to be able to give them access to that employee's encrypted data. And it'd be interesting to see what they go with, just because it can be hard to pull off.
Interesting note, FreeBSD's to-do list contains somebody writing a GOM driver to allow you to use TrueCrypt on partitions.
Oh, right on.
Not just for the fact that, it would allow you to use more portable encryption. Like FreeBSD has two different types of encryption you can choose from, although those aren't very useful on non-BSD systems. Right, you can't mount them if you're not running BSD.
Right,
but TrueCrypt is something that's kind of portable to all these different platforms.
Yeah.
So on top of being able to mount a drive that come from a Linux machine or whatever, it would also mean that you could have it almost down to the layer of, you might even be able to do the boot drive with it.
Wow.
I'm not sure about that, but you'd be able to have other, like your home partition and so on, be encrypted with TrueCrypt, which I don't even know if you can do TrueCrypt as a block device in Linux. I've never looked, but
I'm not sure.
Should be interesting.
I'm checking. Let's see. Lux is what JPViewer6 is. He uses in the chat room on Linux. I've always used just TrueCrypt as like a little standalone. Like I encrypt this volume, this container, this image, and manage it that way. But Allan, I think that's the whole show there, isn't it? Yep. See, I told you, that's a big show, folks. It's a big show.
Yes.
And just a reminder, we're going to be live. Yeah. We're going to be live on Wednesday next week at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern over at jblive.tv. It's cold out here this week, so I'm going to come out here even 2 hours earlier next week and get the heaters and the lights turned on and try to bring the temperature up another few degrees. If you've enjoyed this show and other shows just like it, don't forget to use our affiliate links at the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com or contribute directly. It's a great way to just lock in funding for the content that you really love and enjoy, and that's how we stay independent and on the air is by your support.
You get your name on the wall and a link to your blog or Twitter or whatever else you want to advertise.
Yeah, absolutely. Although that's only working with PayPal.
With PayPal,
yeah. Just to notice. Although Amazon, I know people out there who are not PayPal fans, so we've made Amazon available, and it's a good system. So
yeah, it is. And the nice thing about the PayPal one is like it reminds you a couple days before it charges you each month.
Yes.
So that you know that it's going to happen or whatever. Something PayPal doesn't do.
Right.
But yeah, I've never had a chance to look into the Amazon API to have it work with
the other thing that we seem to have a big problem with PayPal is just after a while, like I don't know if it's like something with people's accounts.
When your credit card expires, Google or PayPal automatically cancels all your subscriptions.
So we just kind of have like this natural drop-off rate.
Yes.
So if maybe some people might want to check if they have donated in the past a monthly sub through PayPal, you might just log in your PayPal account.
Yeah, if you're not getting that email from PayPal every month, then re-up.
Maybe check. And thank you to everybody who does that. And Allan, thank you for a great show. Nice big show. And so now we need your email. So email me in TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, and we'll try to answer them next week. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning to this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.